welcome to the Resilient Mental State Podcast. I'm Kyle Shepard, husband, father, and resilience instructor of over 10 years. Join me as I sit down with writers, independent thinkers, and extraordinary individuals to discuss their unique wisdom through the lens of resilience. Resilience is the ability to effectively manage and recover from stress. It is essential to endure and grow from life's inevitable adversities. Resilience is a skill that can be trained.
Kit Perez. I am fortunate to know a lot of interesting people. Particularly over the past few years, I've met many. And you, my friend, are up there at the top of that list. To name a few things that you are either currently doing or have done, you are an intelligence and deception analyst. You are a liberty activist, a trauma counselor, a teacher, a homesteader. You're the writer behind one of my favorite Substack accounts called The Shepherd Scale, host of Change the Game podcast, and author of now 3 books, one which is sitting behind me, your first book that you co-authored with Claire. Remind me of her name, Claire Wolf.
Claire Wolf.
Yeah, Claire Wolf. Amazing book called Basics of Resistance. You then authored The Mindset of Resistance, and then the newly released book that you co-authored with Donald Vandergriff, which, for all intents and purposes, the name when it comes to mission command and decentralized leadership. And that book is titled Mission Command and the Gray Cell Protocols, which I cannot wait to read because I believe that was released just recently in the past few days. And as interesting as all of those roles are that you've occupied or currently occupying, what I find most interesting about you as I've gotten to know you are the experiences that preceded you pursuing some of these roles. And it's the origin stories of people, particularly in these complex and converging domains that do all of these things that you find ways to fulfill your life and serve others. You, again, my friend, when I name out those different roles you've had, it's beyond impressive, but what's even more interesting is you and your why behind it. So with that, I'd love to start this conversation off with a much easier question than you gave me the last time we talked in public. And my question is, where in the heck did you come from?
I am from the Wisconsin Northwoods.
Wisconsin. So obviously near me in the Midwest. Very good. Tell me about your childhood.
My dad's a retired pastor. I'm oldest of 7 kids. We were all homeschooled. And, it's funny. People say, oh, homeschool kids are weird. I spent a lot of years saying, that's not true. That's not true. All of my brothers and sisters are very successful in their various careers. But, I'm weird. And that's okay. The whole social awkwardness. People say, oh, well, you didn't get to socialize. I had 6 siblings. Of course I socialized. I fought, we did all kinds of stuff. We grew up on a river. So I had that Huck Finn childhood where you're, smashing clams against the rock and using the shell pieces to cut it up so you can use it for bait so you can catch a chub like this big, right? We used to make this little pool. We would take rocks on the shore and we would make a pool so that the water would flow in, and we'd put all our fish, like the day's catch, would go in there because the river otters would come overnight and eat everything. And so if it rained and we couldn't go down to the river, we had like this terrifying fear that the river otters were going to go extinct or something because we weren't there to feed them. Like, they're incapable of feeding themselves unless the 6 of us are down there catching fish. So, but yeah, I have a lot of really good memories from my childhood. But ended up in the military, and I didn't start out, a lot of people assume that I did intelligence in the military. I didn't. I was a grease monkey. I did hydraulics on C-130E models. And it wasn't until, that led to a job at Boeing, led to some other jobs in the aviation field. And I remember I worked on the flight line I was on the avionics crew for the first 787 flight. In fact, on the video that Boeing released, you can see me yelling and screaming like a crazy person because that was my bird, right? Like, I signed off that pre-flight. So I was pretty excited about that. And I eventually left the flight line, and I had this wild hair. They had a controller position, and it was like Boeing 911, right? Like if there's a plane crash, if two aircraft collide on the ramp somehow, the wind, whatever, there's damage, they call this center, and then they get a controller answers the phone and basically manages their little crisis. And I thought, man, that'd be a really cool job. Well, in my interview, the boss says, listen, you don't have the qualifications for this job. Great. Well, I tried. But he says, I want you to come with me for a second. So we walk out onto the floor, and it was like an Intel center, right? Like there's screens everywhere. There's real-time data coming in, and my brain is just like, ah. And he said, every single person in here has a master's or better. You don't even have a bachelor's. I said, okay, I get it. Yeah. I'll come back after I get a degree or whatever, because all I had was an A&P. And he says, but I'm going to hire you. What? He says, there's something about you. I don't know what it is, but he says, I think you're going to do a good job. But the first thing you're going to do is you're going to sign up and you're going to go to school. I don't care if it's for basket weaving, but you got to get a degree to be in this room. Okay. So at that time, Boeing let you get a degree in whatever you wanted, and they would pay you 100%. It was just like, here, free degree. So I looked at all these different options, and I just kept coming back to Intel and saying, man, this is really fascinating to me. I don't know why. I know why now, all that years of experience and whatnot later, I know exactly why it appealed to me, and we can get into that part. But I got the bachelor's in counter intel, and then immediately just went into my master's and got that, and started doing the deception analysis, getting extra training for that, statement analysis, LSI scan, all of those things, interrogation, all that. And then realized that this could be used at my day job. What if, for instance, you could call, because we talk to airlines all the time, and what if I could tell you, if you land a plane in Dallas, let's say, X airline lands a plane in Dallas, I know that on Tuesday night, Joe Schmo happens to be one of the mechanics on duty, and he doesn't do his job. So if I know that, I can predict a certain amount of flights into Dallas are going to have problems because Joe's not going to do the maintenance. But over at this other station, somebody else is on the ball. And so you start combining real-time system data with the fly-by-wire aircraft with the humans, basically, that I am calling around and collecting, eliciting, if you will, using all my new skills, and said, wait a minute, I think I have something. And Boeing said, that's awesome. Here's an award. Also, you don't own this. Also, we just got rid of your job. So if you want to keep your job, you can move to SoCal. And I said, oh, I think I'm going to move to Montana. So that's a very brief version. I've always wanted to collide questions and what if. That's why I love Sam's Substack, right? The now what, because it's what then?
Yeah.
Because that's like the best question ever. What if? What if you do that? What if you don't? So there's my long-winded answer to your question.
I like it. And like you said, we can go back and look at some of those experiences that influence some of those things that you learned in your education that applied to your day job and other areas of your life. How old were you when you joined the military?
19.
19. So were you in how long were you in?
2 years.
2 years. Awesome. And then you said you got out and contracting job right then, or you transitioned out?
No, I actually went the other way and did absolutely nothing productive for most. But you also have to understand, I got out at 21, and that was the beginning of 3 years that really, most of the trauma in my life came during that 3-year period. And it absolutely broke me. It's not, I remember going to a counselor back then and saying, I've just buried a child. I've been sexually assaulted. I just got out of a domestic violence relationship. I don't even know where to begin with how jacked up I am. And she straight up looked at me and said, I can't help you. You're too messed up. Awesome.
Wow.
I love that I still have value, right? And so really my 20s, I look back and I don't think it was a waste, even though it was a waste. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's more like I look back now and I think, okay, what I learned or what I talk about now, I learned in the trenches, like clawing your way back from this. Obviously, I haven't been in combat. I'm never going to be in combat, hopefully, but I do know what it's like to think, okay, I'm going to die in the next 10 seconds if I do not take an action right now. And there's something about that or about, long-term abuse where you learn things about yourself that aren't true. And so that you're coming out of that. So now I'm coming into my 30s. I'm living in Seattle. I am looking for meaning. I am looking to matter. And I'm already very patriotic, very pro-liberty, love me some founding fathers literature, right? Well, what appeals to somebody like that? A militia. That's how I got there. And so I was vulnerable to the exact things that I talk about in my Substack. This validation shame scale. I didn't want to feel shame. I felt plenty of shame for a lot of different things. And it could have gotten a lot worse, but it didn't, thank God. But I get into these groups and I just want to belong. And if you're like, oh wow, taxation is theft and raw liberty and I fly a Gadsden flag and all this, I'm like, ooh, brother, right? We're simpatico. No, we're not.
Yeah.
I didn't know that then. And so I found myself, and now think about, you're going into this militia environment, and you have a master's degree in Intel. You have certain skills. You have certain different access, different things. Well, I also was writing. I was blogging at the time. And these groups were, well, can you come write for us? Can you come do this? Can you run checks for us? Can you do that? Well, yes, I can. All of a sudden, I'm super popular on the surface because I have these skills that people want. And I equated that with I matter. I equated it with I am needed. I am validated. I was none of those things. But it took me a lot longer to realize that. And it took me getting burned. And it took me seeing infiltrators and seeing the games, because the higher you get, the more you see, right? The more access you have, the more people you get to talk to, the more your name gets out. And I realized I watched them push people out who were really good people, but they asked the wrong questions. Why are we doing this? Wait a minute. You guys want to do what? And all of a sudden, oh, so-and-so's a Fed. And I'm sitting here thinking, no, I know what that looks like. And that's not what that is. That's them asking you uncomfortable questions. Why is that uncomfortable for you? And now we have a problem because now I'm a problem. And so it started getting really, it was weird because it went in phases, right? Like I started where I was just trying to learn everything. I was trying to figure out, but as I learned more and as I got better and as I studied the people, not from I wasn't an infiltrator by any stretch, but I wanted to learn, how does this work? Because I wanted to do it better. And I wanted to be effective, right? I was going to take my country back. From what exactly? Or to what? But those weren't questions you were really allowed to ask back then. And there was a bunch of instructors that were going around the country and they would teach classes. I took some wild classes in the boonies. Let me tell you what. I took a CQB class with my husband. I actually got shot point blank with an airsoft in my thigh. It was kind of wild. The instructor thought it was funny. So he was just standing next to me and he just looked at me and shot me in the leg. And I was like, holy balls, that is the most painful thing imaginable right now. But I was kind of mad because initially my husband just stood there. And I was like, why are you not defending my honor, right? Well, he was biding his time because he ended up shooting him in the crotch later that night twice. And the guy was just like, okay, I had it coming. But there's a lot of cool stories and memories and not so cool stories and memories. But see, you have to cut me off because otherwise I just ramble. I just say dumb things.
I mean, you have all of these incredible experiences and you're talking to, I assume, your time with 3% and Order the White Rose and some of the things that the world brought at you during your time in liberty activism that probably brought on a lot of the ideas that you have in the book sitting behind me. And then you've evolved those ideas quite a bit. I do want to rewind a little bit more because you brought up some of your past trauma. And you mentioned them and the fact that you went and saw a counselor. And yeah, it's amazing the people that we interact with in our life and like the positive or potential detrimental effects that they can have on us based on the opportunities of every interaction. And for a trauma counselor to say, I can't help you, you're too messed up, or whatever that paraphrasing was at that time, for you to hear that in that state after those kinds of traumas and those kinds of losses, what a failure of an opportunity for that person who probably got in a job to help people. When you got out of the military, what was your reason for getting out? Was it the individual that you were with?
Yeah, I got out for a guy.
Yeah, and it was that guy.
We were actually in Germany at the time, and he was due to rotate back, and his tour was up, and he said, get out and marry me or you'll never see me again. Now, I look back now and think, what a tool.
Yeah.
But when you're 20 years old and you've got, other issues, validation, you've got daddy issues, whatever your thing is. And this guy tells you that you matter, you do stupid stuff, really stupid stuff. And so, yeah, I was like, hey, let me out. And they did because I said, well, I'm probably not going to perform if you keep me. And now I look back and I'm not ashamed because I don't think that shame does anybody any good. Am I embarrassed? Yes and no, because it was really stupid. It was really stupid and it was immature and it was all those things. And then I think, you know what? Does anybody know anything that's funny? Of course. 30 years later, I can look back and go, what a moron. But at the time, I was doing the best I could with what I had. And I made dumb choices. Okay. What did I learn?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you are not saying the word ashamed. And as you know, I like reframing any word whenever I can to make it productive for its use. But yeah, that shame and like differentiating it from guilt or embarrassed or just like you would do it differently now if you could, but at the same time, that experience influenced who you are today. And so like, yeah, we do a lot of stupid shit when we're 20 if we don't have the best mentors and circles around us guiding us on the right path. And God knows I've been there in different ways too. And another word, by the way, that you mentioned earlier, weird, is one of my favorite words to reframe. And my kids are homeschooled now. And when you were growing up, homeschooling was a little bit more abnormal than it's becoming these days. But it's still like that term weird. Weird means you're not normal. And normal in most domains is not what you want to be. So average is not the goal for most domains. So being weird, stay weird, my friend. But you mentioned...
I mean, I would argue that being able to talk about rough stuff, being able to say, hey, listen, when I was in my 20s, I was absolute trash. Not like trash as a human, but like I was trash. You know what I mean? I want to be able to say that because I've grown past that. I've learned things. And I don't ever want someone to think they can't talk about their story because they are ashamed. I want them to know that, hey, you know what? We've all got those moments where we look back and go, that was so not good. Yeah. That was so embarrassing. Why did I think this was okay? Why did I think this was acceptable or whatever? And being able to not normalize the acts, but normalize the growth that comes from them. Normalize the fact that owning it is okay. Owning it is expected. Owning it is the minimum. And then saying, okay, fine. So you frequently went on a bender. What did you learn? Are you still doing it? Like, I tell people that I want to be able to look back every 5 years and go, how dumb was I 5 years ago? So far, I've got a streak going. So I mean, another 5 years, hopefully I can be like, man, I can watch this interview and be like, what an idiot.
So, going back, and you mentioned it too, like we all go through phases, but at the same time, like the people we surround ourselves with, particularly the people that we choose to be with, no matter how well you're doing, you said you were trash, and I know you mean it metaphorically, but also it sounds like the individual you were with was not only metaphorically, but if he was abusing you was trash. And you can only do so much if you are choosing to be with trash. And it's easier to say it on the outside to somebody. It's much harder to be there in the moment as a 20-year-old girl and making the
Yeah.
choices that you were. Were you being abused already when you decided to get out?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a pretty horrific situation. And here's the part that I think is controversial. And I saw Karina wrote about this the other day. And when I read it, it was like, ugh, because she basically said, and I hope she comments on this and corrects my paraphrasing if necessary, but essentially, if you stay after the second time, you're complicit. And I remember thinking at that time, well, it's only happened once. Or it's only happened, well, he only smashed the windshield. It wasn't my face this time. So that's good. And then you find this rationalization happening where the bar becomes so low that anything above it is fine.
Yeah.
But as abuse escalates, right, the bar gets lower and lower and lower. And now I look back and I think, my God, how did I ever allow it? And allow is the operative word, to get that low. Well, it's because along with the abuse escalating, the value that you believe you have as a human dissipates. And eventually it gets to where, and oddly enough, I think this happens a lot, but I know it happened to me, in relationships after that. Well, let's see, he's not cheating, he's not beating me, he's not drinking, we're good. No, we weren't. It was a completely unhealthy environment, right? And it's funny because I've been with Eric, my husband, for 11 and a half years. And when we first got together, we both had PTSD. We both had just some really severe stuff. And we formed this weird little world where we protected each other's trauma. There was no growth. It was, okay, I know that these are your triggers, so I'm going to provide this insulating, we can't go to this because Eric struggles with this situation. Or, we can't come to your baby shower or whatever your thing is, your christening or whatever, because Kit can't be around infants. And right around this 6-7 year mark, which is funny, right? That's usually when a lot of marriages go, whoa, we were like, wait a minute. We don't have a marriage. We don't have this symbiotic mutual growth thing. We have a trauma bond, and we really need to fix this because neither one of us was really at a point where we could look at each other and go, I really respect who you are as a human. I respect the things you're trying to do, because we were spending so much time babysitting each other's emotions. And so we started this process of just really digging into the poop. And oh man, it was rough. It was rough. There were times we did not like each other. But we started to actually get real with each other. And what does it even mean to love someone? What does it mean when you say you love me? What do you mean by that? But how am I receiving it? Am I receiving it correctly? And we found that we had different definitions of what love even was. I'm sitting here saying, well, you don't do X, Y, Z. And he's like, yeah, but I'm doing A, B, C, and vice versa. And so it's been a really long, long road. I had cancer a couple years ago, and he took care of me, and we went through a bunch of miscarriages. And the first one that I ever had, I remember they sent me home to recover, and they said, you're going to be, on bed rest for a day or two. And he tucks me into bed and he says, I'll be right back. And he leaves for like 20 minutes. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like dying here, right? Doing the chick thing. He comes in with this stack of trashy magazines and ice cream and chocolate, and he puts it on the bed and he sits down and he's like, okay, what are we watching on TV? And that to me was that was real. And that was one of the first, I think, real things that we had done for each other. And so yeah, there's my long rambling soliloquy on marriage.
Beautiful.
But
And there's so much there that I want to dig into more. You mentioned that you lost a child, though, shortly after you exited service. I assume was that with the individual you were with at the time? What happened then?
I I got well, I found out I was pregnant, and the next day he volunteered to go to Saudi. And I went for an ultrasound, and I think I was a week and a half shy of 6 months. Or yeah, something like that. 5.5, 6 months. Anyway, they said he had multicystic dysplastic kidneys. And they said he had it in both kidneys. They showed me the ultrasound. There was some deformity. And they said it's a fatal condition if he has it in both. And there's nothing you can do. You should abort. And I couldn't do it. I said, I'm just not going to do that. Well, long story short, we worked out this agreement where they said I would induce labor and I would go through labor, give birth naturally. And I said, you have to promise you will try to save him. Like, that is the point. And they said, well, he's not going to live. I don't care. You have to try. Well, I went into labor by myself, had the baby by myself, 16 hours. I planned his funeral while I was in labor.
Nice.
And that is a really surreal, and I will never forget, this is horrible, and I will probably laugh inappropriately. But I remember when the funeral director was sitting in the corner of the room, and I am on a metric butt ton of painkillers because they didn't expect the baby to live. And so they were a little more liberal than they would have normally been. And there was a pink elephant on his shoulder in my head. Like, I saw this pink elephant. And so I'm like, hey, you have a pink elephant on your head or on your shoulder. And he did not know how to process that. And he's like, do you understand that you're preparing your baby's funeral? And I'm like, yeah, you, me, and the elephant. And it's just such a wild experience. Does that make sense? Like, there's so many weird parts to it where I just go, how do you even begin to process that, right? But he was born. They offered me the chance to hold him. So they said, we can either work on him or you can hold him. The end result's going to be the same. So naturally, I chose to hold him. And I named him. He was 1.5 pounds and 12 inches. And his name was Hunter Michael. And they took him away after about 45 minutes. And then a couple days later, I had to borrow some money, the $300, to bury him. And I was the only person, me and the funeral director were the only person at his funeral. And when that was over, I got a 12-pack of beer and I sat on the shore of the river and I got blindingly drunk. And then the next morning I went to work. And that was it. And so there was no support. Like, there was no framework to help process this. So it just went cheat, right? And then it was kind of compounded a couple years later when I was pregnant with my son Alex. They had done some research of the records because they said this was potentially a genetic condition. They wanted to make sure Alex didn't have any. And they went back over the records, different hospital, different state. And they said, he didn't have it in both kidneys. So I'm sorry, what? No, he just had it in one. Had you carried him to term, it wouldn't have been as much of an issue as what they told you. It wasn't a fatal condition. Well, when you already have the trauma resume that I had, to be told essentially you killed your child, you don't come back from that without severe intervention. And that, I think, was the absolute lowest point I've ever been. And it took many years. I think the term for it is complex grief, but it took me many, many years to get to where I could be in a room with an infant and not have a panic attack, and it was just doing the work to heal, doing the work to face it, to say, okay, I did the best I could with what I had. Was it the right call? Obviously not, but that wasn't, I made as informed a call as I could have. And I can now see that line through my life of each one of these as a building block. Each one of these did something to me, but it did something for me. And I have to choose that path because, if I sit and think about it, well, yeah, I can cry. I can get depressed. I can get all of these things. Or I can say, my son Alex is absolutely phenomenal. And that's what I got. He is the gift that I got in return for all of that. And so that's what I'm going to focus on.
And you learned about Hunter and what you mentioned with his kidneys while you were pregnant with Alex. Wow.
Yeah, and it kind of all comes full circle because my son, God bless him, he came to me about a year ago and he said, listen, I have some questions. Okay, let's do this. And he asked me some questions about Hunter, and he knew some things, but it was, as he was growing up, it was the thing you didn't talk about because I wasn't in a position to discuss it, but now I am. And so he asked me some questions and I gave him the information he wanted. And he comes back later and he says, I talked to that funeral or that cemetery. And I was like, and he goes, I want to put an actual gravestone there. And here's the catalog. Could you pick one? And I was standing at my stove. I kid you not. I was making dinner and I'm standing there stirring. And he said that to me and I just lost it. Like absolutely just. Pff. And I thought, if after all of this, if after the long, arduous path, if my son can come to me and say, I'm going to do this for you, for my brother, I did okay. So that's what I take from that. You were supposed to ask me about resistance, Kyle. And now you got me like all talking about mushy crap.
We'll get there. This is beautiful. I mean, it's obviously originally awful, but what it's led to in you and Alex and the memory of Hunter and making a why behind his loss. Some of the most beautiful things come from some of the hardest moments. And it's an important thing to reflect on after the fact, because if and when the next awful comes and you have these memories, whether it's pictures of you after overcoming a previous adversity of a near-death experience, and you go back there and you experience that, like your recent amazing post from what happened in Montana, and also remembering loss that we've experienced in different ways, and having lost children myself in different ways. And you talking about like where the mind goes when you're going through, your child is not going to make it and you're in your second or third trimester and there's no chance anymore. And now you're trying to make these decisions and deal with it. It's surreal. And the mind and the conscience and the soul and the separation, it just, you keep trying to do what you can, but at the same time, like just these out of body experiences. And it just, I never saw
That's an excellent way of putting it.
the pink elephant in the room. That's funny. I never saw the pink elephant, but man, that was there. And you're trying to have these conversations, but we're doing this with that metaphorical pink elephant right in front of us. And it's very hard to do because it's so freaking distracting. How can I talk to you about deciding what we're
Right.
going to do with our child's death when
Yeah.
I'm still trying to process that? And complex grief. I mean, what an appropriate diagnosis for what you were dealing with when you consider the stacked traumas that you had on top of it. And like we think about resistance, and obviously you've written books on the concept, but it's not a concept in your book. It's not this theory. You make it very practical. You make it very tactical and actionable for people that when you realize you're fed up with whatever the system is that you're in personally or organizationally, how do you start making actual steps toward change of the environment or yourself? How do you resist what is unacceptable, whether it's beyond yourself or within yourself? And like all great books I've read, you can apply it to many domains, both internally and externally. And that's what you've done here. And obviously, when you think about your past and what we're talking about right now, you reached a point where it was enough and you were ready to resist. I'm curious if that time in your life is what started kind of the snowball effects of what what led you into activism, into resistance, into the gray cell protocols that you're working with today.
You know, I know I mentioned it kind of at the beginning of this. I know why I chose Intel. Well, let's think about this. Now that you have kind of this microcosm of what I've come out of, you have this. What would make someone with my trauma profile want to be a counterintelligence and deception analyst and then go into criminal profiling? Well, obviously, this was a way for me to stay safe.
Yeah.
This was, I'm going to see this coming and it'll never happen to me again. But what's more, I'm going to do it on a contract basis so that I can also protect other people because I can't fix me. But you know how it works in your head. You think that by helping other people, you are fixing you, or you're trying to fix you, or you're trying to rectify this huge wrong that was done, or what have you. And it was because I was unhealed. It was because there was all this unprocessed. And obviously, I'm not saying that every counterintelligence analyst has unprocessed trauma, right? But for me, that's what it was. And so I lived, breathed, ate this stuff. Like, it's all I did. I studied everything I could get my hands on. I went to classes. I read more books. Everything I could get because I thought I'm going to be the best there is. Well, that's not even a reachable goal, but we could talk about, unrealistic goals later. But as I healed, in the last just 5 years or so, I realized, wait a minute, I talk about this on Substack, unhook the compulsion wagon of the skills and instead use them as a discipline instead of I have to read a room when I walk into it. Well, now I choose to, or I have to analyze everything somebody says to me. Well, no, you learn how to sometimes turn it off. I have to turn it off with my husband because otherwise our arguments are wild. What you meant was this. No, I didn't. So you can get kind of ridiculous with that. But as I healed, I remember going to my pastor and saying, I want to use this because there's a lot of trauma in our church. And I want to go to school and become a counselor for that. I want to use my story to help other people. And he's like, that's awesome. So I did it. And got a master's degree in trauma counseling and crisis intervention. And, they always say you shouldn't talk about, you shouldn't disclose your own stuff. And thankfully, because I work under a church, it's a little bit different. I don't have a lot of the same rules. But I will say that I've seen, and I don't dump my story on everybody. Like, why would I do that? This is the most I've talked about my story in a really long time, actually. But I've seen what happens when someone gets to a point where they feel comfortable telling you the deepest, darkest thing that they are so ashamed of. This happened to me, but it was my fault, or whatever. And I go, that happened to me too. And that second of human connection, where it's like, you are not alone. And just because I'm on this side of the desk and you're on that side doesn't mean anything. We're just two humans who had to go through a horrific thing, and we figured out how to survive it. And now we're going to figure out how to thrive together. And that, it's such a powerful moment to see. And I am grateful that people talk to me about their stuff and let me share and let me listen. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I couldn't be more grateful that there's trauma counselors out there like you who have that sort of view on how to connect, because obviously they do say, like, don't air your baggage. And I get why they say that, because
Mhm.
like on one side, you don't want to wear it. You don't want to make your baggage your
Right.
identity. So like maybe it's part of that. And maybe it's also like you don't want to make it uncomfortable. Like this isn't good small talk. You're right. It's not good small talk. And like you don't want to just air it everywhere. But man, deep conversations and being vulnerable and sharing your hard stories from your past or present only encourages others to do the same. If you're willing to own that and speak literally and honestly about it, and not from like, don't get me wrong, if you're in a victim mindset or you're still struggling, there's a place for that too, and you want to be honest wherever you're at. But when you have someone in front of you who truly cares, who truly wants to understand your perspective, but even more so has a deep understanding your perspective because they have been through their own shit too. I mean, a trauma counselor who's experienced trauma is most likely going to be the best kind of trauma counselor to have that shared understanding at a deeper level, rather than somebody who's just trying their best, with props to them. And thank God they haven't had that hardship. They might have some in the future, but trying their best to understand and take yourself outside of your own head. But absolutely that resonates. And that's the most powerful reason to get into that. And I'm glad you mentioned all your degrees. I didn't bring that up into the different roles because we're similar in age, but I was like, when did she go to school after all this other experience? I know she has, like, two masters, a bachelor's degree, and all this cool stuff that you've done. But your reasons for doing it, it's just, it could not be more beautiful, because those reasons are basically from experiences where you wanted to help others, maybe at the same time when you couldn't help yourself. But you just explaining why you got into trauma counseling as you healed and sharing that with your pastor. And I'm doing math in my head. You've been married for 11 years, and you said you and your husband went through what they typically call like the 7-year itch, but you didn't go through that kind of itch. You went through you went through the itch of like, hey,
Yep.
we're in a trauma bond relationship. We need to make something change right now. Or this is not a genuine unconditional love marriage. This is a supportive, guarding, protecting, keeping us
Babysitting.
yeah, encouraging our aversions,
Yep.
trying to shield all the stress that's out there, like somehow that's helping us. And that sounds like it's around the same time that you actually experience your healing from your previous trauma
Well,
too.
it's funny because I had thought that Hunter's death was it was a thing, if that makes sense. It wasn't something that I obsessed about. It was just something that I kept so I talk about this to my clients all the time, where you have, like, say you leave a McDonald's soda cup in your console, right? Eventually it breaks down and it leaks. And I was doing this thing, and my clients do this thing, where we just go, oh, wow, it's making a mess. Let me wipe all the way around the cup and let me just keep that clean. Oh, it's leaking again. Let me wipe it all back up. Just deal with the cup, right? But I wasn't dealing with the cup.
Yeah.
I was getting really good at just wiping around and thinking, well, we're just that's in a box and it says do not open. And so we don't open it. And it wasn't until my first class for my trauma counseling degree, um, I was literally assigned a paper right about the effects on a parent when a child dies. And I was like, are you kidding me? I do not. It forced me to open the box. But in having to read all of the literature, none of which I had seen before, and starting to see the statistics that when you lose a child, statistically, you're going to die earlier. you're probably gonna, you're more likely to have chronic disease. You're more likely to have all of these things because it's such an unnatural occurrence that there's not even a word for it, right? And so if you do not have the support that you need, literally right then, within that first 12 hours, you need psychological first aid. You need somebody to sit with you in the fire of it and the filth of it and just say, it's okay. I'm here. Even if they're not saying anything, they're just sitting there. And I had none of that. And so being able to read, what is this supposed to look like? Like, how do we as humans meet someone in that level of horror? And here's my situation. And it was just such a gap that it forced me to kind of just face the idea that I did the best I could. Did I do it right? Absolutely not. My first day back at work, somebody comes up and goes, "Hey, I heard you were pregnant." What do you even say? I literally laughed and said, "Oh no, I buried him yesterday." And the guy had no idea what to say, so he walked away. And then I walked away and I go, "Wow, that was a weird thing to say." But I was so numb and so in shock, right? It was literally the day before. And being able to see all of that literature was just such a wide open, it forced me to process. And I kid you not, when it finally hit, I cried for 3 days straight. I didn't eat. Like, I just sat here and just kept reading and kept reading, and I'm just crying. And, Eric's coming out, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" "I need you to go away." But I needed that. And it all came out. It all came out. And I realized, about a year ago, I held a baby for the first time in 30 years. He will turn 31 this year. So yeah,
Wow.
long time ago.
Wow.
And so imagine how hard it was to raise Alex with this absolute issue, right? Yeah, it's been a really long road now that I think about it. I can't believe you made me talk about all this stuff. That's wild.
And I keep thinking about that too, knowing you raised Alex in that state where you were nowhere near close to healing. You were suppressing to the
Oh
darkest
yeah.
depths of your soul and trying not to open that leaking box like you talked about, but yet you still formed this beautiful 31-year-old man who's doing things like he came to you with recently for the gravestone for his brother. And like somehow you figure out a way through it. But what I love that you keep saying is that you've come to the place where you know you did your best with what you had at that time. And I like doing that charitable interpretation for others because I think most people do their best. There's some who unfortunately don't. And
Correct.
again, I don't know the man. I don't know his past of who we talked about that you were with when you exited the military. But there's just some people out there who are not doing their best and they're doing it for other reasons that I cannot be charitable toward. But that is, in my opinion, a rarity. But when we think about ourselves, for sure, in the past, what a nice way to forgive ourselves when you know with what you had, you did your best. But now, while you know you could have done differently, you can't change the past. That past is dead, but you have done differently. Now you have healed. And now look at you finding a way to help others through that process so it doesn't happen to them in the same way it did happen to you with your first trauma counselor and with all the subsequent experience that you had after. It's beautiful, Kit.
I and I thought about it before I came on here, and I was like, I hope he doesn't ask about this. I hope he doesn't ask about that. Of course, we ended up talking about all of that. And it's not that I don't like to talk about it. It's that I want people to let the work speak for itself. But I also, in thinking about it, there is value, I suppose, in knowing, well, how did this work come to be? Well, it evolves layer by layer by layer, as we were talking before you went live, where the first book, I read it and I go, wow, I almost don't even recognize that person. That person was doing some wild stuff. And then the second book, okay, well, I need to clarify some stuff that was in the first book because my thinking has evolved.
Yeah.
And now I read the Mission Command book and think it's like written by a totally different person. Not because the work is so different, but it's evolved. It's brought in more dimensions, and I'm constantly learning. There's a joke that every few years I have to go back to school because my brain gets bored. So I've been feeling the itch, and I think I have it narrowed down, but we'll see. We'll see. Because now the book's done, so now my brain's like, all right, well, what are we doing now?
What's next? Yeah, you don't have enough on your plate. You should definitely think about something else.
I,
But yeah, you read all your work, you listen to your podcast, and you're a brilliant writer. But at the same time, any brilliant person who's trying to get better can, and most like, this word always stands out when I say it, but should look back and be like, that was a different me 5 years ago. I would have done this differently. But at the same time, I was doing the best that I could with what I had then. And that was part of the system that allowed me to get to where I am today. If I didn't have that, what now looks like shit, I wouldn't have what is probably shit right now that's going to get even better 5 years from now.
In another 5 years, I'm going to be like, man, that Mission Command book was horrible. No, hopefully not. Hopefully this one stands. And honestly, I think all the books stand for what they were written for.
Yeah.
I'm not as involved with resistance myself. I mean, obviously, you can Google my name, so that means whatever underground abilities I had are gone, right?
Yeah.
But I can teach other people, and so I think some of the most amusing stories I have are the ones from just trying to work with people. I think that honestly was probably the biggest contributor to GCP ever, was just what is logical to me, and even was logical then. I could easily, like, say you're a group leader, and I've written about this particular story and many like it, where you say, hey, we want to do this, we want to do a training thing. And that was the big deal where in the region I was, everybody would just go out in the mountains and train. Well, what does that even mean? Also, you all live in the metro area. So what is it that we're doing? Because you're not going to just grab your people and run to the mountains, right? Like, that's not going to happen. You're not even going to get out of Seattle. But we would all religiously go to the mountains to train. And a guy asked me one time, well, can you help me plan this training event? I don't want feds to go. Okay, well, here's how you do it. Well, I got a burner. I just finished setting it up. I says, where are you right now? He goes, at my house. I'm like, great. This is awesome. So I go through the whole thing and explain to him, this is how you set this up. And he goes, well, how are we going to invite people? You don't invite people. Like, what are you talking about? And so he's like, but I want people to come watch. I said, what are you running a zoo? Like, we had this, like, I was laughing even on the conversation, but it kind of got a little adversarial because he was absolutely adamant that he wanted people to come watch them train. I said, for what? And we ended up hanging up the phone. He goes, well, you've given me a lot to think about. I'll think about it. Okay. 2 days later, he makes a Facebook event. And he's like, come watch us train. We have hot dogs.
Sounds like my dude was trying to live out a movie. And but I want to mention, you mentioned GCP, so Grace Hill Protocols, where you've gotten to with systems that you have these days. But I assume you're talking about some of the wild stuff that you referred to, maybe when you're starting to think about this first book, Basics of Resistance. Was that 3% years, or was that what came after?
Trying to think what year that was. I want to say 2017, 2018.
Book came out.
I was coming out of it.
So for everybody, real quick, can you say what 3% is and how you found it and why you left?
That's a whole other hour. All right, let me see if I can do this quick. So the 3% was started by a guy named Mike Vanderbilt, who was very instrumental in several militias. He was an interesting dude, and he actually we got to be very, very good friends, as he was an older guy and he ended up dying of cancer. But he left his gear to my son, and that was a huge deal. But he used to do this thing where he would smuggle magazines into states where they were illegal, and he would just hand them out. And then he would mail them to the Congress members in that state, to their office. Because now guess what? You've opened this, now you're in possession of an illegal magazine. And so he was just super creative with things like that. And I learned a great deal from him. And so he started the 3%, and it's predicated on the idea that, and it's called an erroneous belief. I'm not going to argue about it, but only 3% of the colonists actually took up arms.
Okay.
And he also ran what he called the 100 Heads Insurance Company, which was, you take one of ours, we take 100 of yours. But he printed up these business cards listing, himself as an agent, and he would just put them on like agents' vehicles. Because it's not technically a threat, but it's kind of a threat. You know what I mean? And he just did all of this stuff. But he, you probably saw in the book about pet milk, he would use sweetened condensed or evaporated milk to put these posters up, and they don't move. Like it's like concrete. But anyway, so I got into that and realized that so many people at the time were just like me. They wanted to matter. They wanted to belong to something. They wanted to believe that what they did mattered. And because the identity gets fused to the mission, whatever the mission is, and quite frankly, the mission is some nebulous idea, there's just so much infighting. There's so much, so-and-so's a Fed. It's like I don't like what you have to say, so you're probably a Fed.
Yeah.
And I saw real people get their reputations ruined over accusations that weren't actually true. Meanwhile, the people who were actually infiltrators are the ones making the accusations, right? Because that's how you do it.
Sure. So you left 3% because you started recognizing personalized within it, where maybe like while they were like you, they all had their baggage and they want to be part of something, but maybe they were less than virtuous, less than what kind of your idea was behind resistance and activism. Because you guys, from my understanding, doing stuff on the dark web, trying to educate people on certain laws, and then things started coming at you. I think, is that when you were labeled an anti-government extremist? And what made you leave?
It was more like, because White Rose was actually very small. It actually followed the premise of Basics of Resistance. We did it right.
Yeah.
And we taught a couple classes, but it was all very legal stuff. We never did anything illegal. I can say that openly.
Yeah.
It was far more based on preparedness and education and things like that. But the 3% just, like I say, you get deep enough into something and you start realizing that even if somebody isn't being paid by the federal government, that doesn't mean they're not an infiltrator. And I say this on Substack all the time. If you're there for a purpose other than the mission, you're an infiltrator. And that meant a lot of people, right? If you're there because you want to, there was one event I was at, and this was toward the end, like I was already going, wait a minute. And we were protesting somebody's arrest. And at one point I looked up at the roof and there was a sniper, DHS sniper on the roof, because it was a federal courthouse. And he was pointing at me. I'm thinking, I have a gun at my head right now where if I do the wrong thing, he's going to shoot me. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? Like, it wasn't the fact that I was quote unquote in danger. It was the fact that I could not answer the question, what am I doing this for? And even more so, what am I doing? Period.
Yeah.
If I can't answer that, why am I doing it? And so it really kind of forced me to back up and go, okay, wait a minute. it's easy to get, it's like a snowball, right? Like you get in there and the feelings, the emotions get involved, and I'm doing cool stuff, and I'm special. I'm
Yeah.
important. But it sucks you in, and you start rolling, and before you know it, you're standing there in the middle of this protest where there are snipers all the way around. There's all sorts of bad things that you are 2 seconds away from happening because you pushed it a little far, and you can't even answer why you're doing it. That to me was like a very uncomfortable wake up. Um, and I said, I remember writing a blog post. I used to run a blog called the Patrick Henry Society. And I wrote a blog post and said, this is why I'm leaving. I can't, what you guys are doing, I appreciate why you're doing it, but this isn't something I want to do. Like, I can't. So I just wanted to really kind of turn inward and go, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And that, I think, was really the seed of a lot of this work, because I realized so many of these people, when you ask them, and they're not bad people, they are salt of the earth, greatest people ever. And they've got trauma, and they've got validation issues, and they want to be wanted, and they want to be needed. Um, and then I thought, wait a minute, I just spent 8 years in school learning how to leverage these people, because that's who my classmates were. That's where I went to school, was a school that teaches agents. That was the college. And so I started flipping my thinking, okay, if I was going to leverage them, how would I do it? How are they being leveraged, and how can I back up and find the core of it and synthesize, right? How can I break it down to its parts and then teach them how to stop it? Because there's nobody doing that. There's nobody teaching them, hey, this piece of you right here that you're trying to hide, I see it. I can tell you how I would use it, and I can make your life hell. Somebody else is trying to do that. And when you look at, for instance, the Malheur refuge, that standoff, 15 informants? Are you serious right now? At one point, there were more informants there than there were regular people. And I've written extensively about the vetting failures and well, if you're constantly going off of, how does this person make me feel about myself? That's what I define as trust. You're screwed. Because all you have to do is make me feel good about myself, and I will give you anything. And it's being used by red pill males. It's being used by companies and ads. And I mean, it's literally one of the most basic premises. Like you say, you take it into different domains. And if you find, I call it the number one need in mindset of resistance, but I think I've evolved it past that. It's always validation. It's just, I tell people that validation is the party you're trying to get to, but we all use a different car.
Hmm.
And
I like
so maybe it's money, maybe it's sex, maybe it's power, maybe it's whatever, but it's really validation. And I just need to figure out what somebody's vehicle is. And then you give it to them, and then you make yourself the source of more of it. But if I know that, now I can flip that, and I can say, hey, Kyle, let me tell you how I could leverage you so you can stop it. But that sometimes leads to me getting called a fed. Because that's what you do, right? If I don't like what you have to say, you're a fed.
Well, it makes sense that a lot of your experience with 3% and in that realm preceded this book, and then a lot of this book was probably inspired by, I don't know how it lined up with Order of the White Rose, but what you did there, and you briefly explained that, which I agree, that sounds beautiful, like teaching people how to flip that, how to recognize that, and how to leverage it, and how to actually do something that, like you say, what am I doing and what is it actually resulting in? And so, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing these questions to yourself? And then how do you make them actionable so you can actually start accomplishing the things that you're trying to do outside of yourself? Important questions to ask. And I know you love questions just like I do. So you can keep reorienting and finding the direction that you're trying to get toward. I'm curious, did you meet your husband during the 3% time and then left with him and started to order the White Rose, or when did you meet Eric?
I met Eric at a militia training event early on. He, well, first I bought his chest rig from him. And so we met up. I was working at Boeing and we met up at midnight because I was working nights in the parking lot, and he got out of his truck. And it's funny because that article that you posted yesterday about 10 things that men need to know about women or whatever, I read it to him and I was like, I'd get done with one, I'd be like, true. I get done with one, true. And when it said, how you use the space or how the space moves around you, as soon as I saw him get out of the truck, and I'm like, that is going to happen. I don't care what I have to do. And it was first sight. I don't know what it was, but then I didn't see him again for a while. And then I showed up to a militia training event out in the mountains, right?
Mm-hmm.
And turns out he was the training officer.
Wow.
And he got out of his truck and I was like, oh my God, it's him. And he just marches right up to me and he looks at my rifle and he goes, your rifle's bone dry. Really? But it's so clean. He goes, yeah, don't you lube your rifle? I was like, no. Well, that's not a mistake I've ever made again. But yeah, I don't know what it was, but had to have him. Thankfully, he hasn't left yet.
That article you mentioned, that was not my article, but I know what you're talking about because our buddy Marshall shared it with me too, about like 10 things men need to know about women. It was well done. And just considerations of what others might consider that are not common to you. And another great frame to think about when we think about the opposite sex. And so that was well done. Now, you talked about how you and your husband went 6 or 7 years before you started the healing process together, and probably right around the same time you started your own healing process. I'm curious, before you went to school to be a trauma counselor, after having the first failed experience with a trauma counselor, and I'm not sure how much other attempts at work other than, of course, what you did, so none. What was the healing process for you individually before you went to school, as well as you with your husband? How did you guys start taking action toward healing?
We well, we had joined our volunteer fire department, and I got my EMT license, and we were throwing ourselves into that because that's what you do, right? Like if you want to heal from trauma, you should just be around a whole lot more trauma. It's really healing. But I remember a local church had put on, they did this dinner for first responders in the valley, and it was free. They just did a tri-tip and said, here, we want to appreciate you, just come eat free food. And my chief called us one night and was like, hey, you need to come down here because they put on there's a lot of food here and you need to come down. I was like, oh, people. But I come down the mountain and we go there and I walk in the door. It's kind of legend now, but part of the lore of Kit, I guess. They laugh about it. But some rando just walks up to me at the door, gets well within my arm length and a half bubble, and goes, hi, how you doing? So glad to have you here. And I'm like, who is this Yahoo? And so we eat the food and everybody is just, there's something weird. There's something weird. And I can't figure out what it is. And we get in the truck to go home. And I'm like, these people are really weird. Eric goes, yeah, they're really weird. Should we go to church here tomorrow? He goes, I mean, I guess. I go see how weird they are. Okay, fine. So we go the next day and they're still weird. And they're asking me questions about myself. And they're just not nosy, though. It was like all of my training, I was exhausted by the end of that day because I had put every skill I had to work, looking at the body language, looking at the facial expressions, and everything added up to these people genuinely thought I was a human being worth talking to. They didn't want anything. They just wanted to be real and they wanted to connect. And I kept throwing that conclusion out because I'm like, that can't be it. So it's got to be something else. And I couldn't find it. So that night I was like, man, that's a weird church. He goes, yeah, it's weird. Should we go next week? Okay. So we kept going back because I'm thinking at this point, I'm going to prove that these people are full of it. But they weren't. They were real. And I remember going to coffee with one of the ladies there, and she was just being so nice to me, and it was really starting to get up to me. And I said, listen, you need to know something about me. If you want to be my friend, you need to know this. How's that grab you? She goes, well, first of all, you should probably know I'm a therapist. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. She goes, so yeah, none of that bothers me. You still want to be friends? My brain said no. And my mouth was like, okay. And that honestly, that was, almost 5-6 years ago. And just little by little, people come up to me all the time now and tell me how scary I was when I just had this aura of don't talk to me. I don't want to know you. And I didn't want people to know me. I didn't want to know them. But just little by little, they just kept wearing me down. And just the authenticity of it. And obviously, there's plenty of people in any church that are good or bad or whatever you want to call it. But the people that poured into me and Eric and just were like, listen, we don't know what we're doing. We're just trying to follow the Lord, and sure would like it if you wanted to do it too. And they just came alongside of us and just really supported us through all of that. I remember calling my pastor up one time and I said, I'm not divorcing him, but I'm moving downstairs. And he goes, okay, you want to talk about it? Yes. Just 1,000 little moments of real human connection. And they actually taught me how to do it because I didn't know. I'd never seen it. I'd never done it. I didn't know. I just knew it would cost me if I did it. And I kept pushing people away. And then when, we went through surgeries and they would just show up. They'd come and they'd clean, or they'd come and they'd just sit, or they'd show up. My husband just got his tonsils out 2 weeks ago. 7:00 in the morning, our pastor shows up at the hospital and he's like, hey, just wanted to see if you guys need anything. Like, not even just a text. Like, he showed up in person. That's real. That's humanity. And they've just been such an incredible force for showing both of us, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to really connect? What does it mean to be real? And I've always been real in the sense that I don't care. Like, I'll just say, obviously, I've been here talking for an hour and a half, but the vulnerability aspect of it, that's the real. And you can't fake that. You can't. I don't know even how to explain it, but you know it when you see it. It's kind of like porn, right? You know it when you see it.
Yeah. And you just had a great conversation with that with Mac about that, of course, on your podcast. But I mean, you and I have talked offline about so many things. I could talk to you all day about anything, but you sharing your story today in the ways that you have and being vulnerable and kind of explaining that why behind where you've gotten to and how you got there, and ending with this and the power of that community that found you and you found simultaneously, and then coming back to that word weird and leaning into it. And that's amazing because we are an interconnected species, and that is powerful, but it can also be limiting when we are connected to others that are not serving us in any way. And we don't have those support systems that are crucial to our resilience and to our potential of thriving. And I'm so grateful that God led you to finding Eric and to finding a community like that, and them showing you that there is so much good in this world. And it's just such a beautiful story of the power of God and how faith brought you to healing yourself and to now healing others and to helping your marriage better. And you just learned that passively through other people. Just continue to show back up to what it, like, I love that you said that you knew it would come with a cost. And it's funny how, like, your previous orientations, because of your previous life experience, caused you to estimate that price as not worthwhile and influenced your next
Yeah,
decision and actions for a long time. But you
absolutely.
you accepted that potential cost, leaned into it, and now look where you are. And so sometimes, rather than listening to that mind of ours that often uses past experience to make future decisions and try to predict everything, sometimes that soul will send a different signal. And listening to that weird, that can be beneficial when you're doing it for the right reasons. And I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I'm still learning. I don't get everything right. I get a lot of things wrong. I frequently have to tell people, listen, I say dumb stuff. It just falls out of my mouth. I can't help it. So just roll with it. So a lot of times my husband just laughs and he says, oh, geez. He says that a lot when I talk. But yeah.
Well, I'll be curious to see if he says that about our conversation tonight, my friend. This was amazing. I'll be talking to you soon. I think we text almost every day these days because you crack me up. And like I said, we talk about a lot of things offline. And I'm sure there'll be many topics for us to talk about in the future. But this has been an absolute pleasure. Kit, thank you.
Thank you for letting me ramble. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Until next time.
Remember, all the knowledge in the world means little unless you uniquely apply it to your life. Challenge yourself to take action. Knowledge applied is wisdom earned. Determine what is important to you and get after it with intention, effort, and consistency. Until next time, stay resilient, my friends.